Welcome learners. As we have already discussed in the previous week, social differentiation and stratification has been a reality of a society. Indian society too has divisions based on gender, caste and class. In this session, we will try to understand the social fabric of tribal life in the context of gender, class and caste. I will be recapitulating the meaning of class, caste and gender and explain the relationship between class, caste and gender. I will also discuss class, caste and gender issues in tribal society. Deshpande observed that Dalit women are worse off than upper caste women in terms of standard of living, decision making at a household level, and the prevalence of domestic violence, suggesting that caste, class, and gender intersect in increasing or decreasing women's vulnerability. Since the 1960s and 1970s, many sociologists have, in particular, questioned the traditional simplified Varna system that perpetuates class and gender inequalities based on purity pollution. The empirical reality suggests an alternative and a more complex view in which not only do different castes have different hierarchical elaborations, but also those castes who find themselves in extremely humiliating and subordinate positions currently refuse to accept the theory of karma and pollution purity when it comes to caste ordering. Social scientists have begun to find, as a result, caste identity both fixed and immutable, and clean and unclean castes had become the most powerful and enduring expression of modern caste. In western Uttar Pradesh, virtually all the substantial tillers call themselves Jat, whereas their clean caste counterparts in South India identify themselves as Gaundars in Tamil Nadu's dry grain Konku region and Kamas and Reddis in the Telugu country. As a result, the everyday experience of caste not only brings alternative language to Brahmanical purity and pollution, but also the way it is performed in a variety of ways, forming caste associations, formulating marriage requirements, and so on. It is suggested that it would be useful to look at caste as something which people do rather than something which they are. This idea appears to go against the grain of modern interests in identity, but both are complementary. Secondly, while caste is a very important characteristic to Indians, it is not integrated by a single systematic principle apart from that of differentiation. Caste is not a unitary phenomena, yet social scientists have grossly overestimated the degree of coherence or consensus that has existed about caste. In reality, what goes under the name of caste is highly diverse and means different things to different people. For instance, belonging to a large locally dominant caste must always have felt different from belonging to a small scattered caste. Likewise, for untouchables, Dalits, it is still a defining feature for their social identities, whether they like it or not, including the scope of their opportunities. Therefore, caste in an Indian context is not a fixed and rigid form of identification, but changes over time, with scope for both invention and rejection of tradition. If this is the case, Sharma posits that there is no enduring content to the institution of caste. It is whatever people say or do in its name at any one time. Since independence in 1947, caste practices in India have undergone change, including the rural areas. This is partly due to the independence movement, rapid population growth, education, industrialization, urbanization, and reservation of seats for low castes in the local governing bodies. Ritual restrictions which prevailed have lost much of their force. Intercaste marriages have increased, and general relations on commensal restrictions have reduced even in rural areas, although this breakdown of barriers is evident between adjacent castes rather than between castes at the extreme of the hierarchy. Sharma posits that this decline in ritual distinction has occurred not due to the Indian constitution but due to the impossibility of expressing ritual distance from inferiors, unlike the erstwhile isolated and parochial villages. Modernization and rapid urbanization have made these practices difficult to sustain. Caste based hereditary occupational linkages are no longer rigid. Modernization and industrialization have not only introduced machines but also, more importantly, altered caste and class relations. The effect of modernization led to the opening up of the village economy and the concomitant freedom of the lower castes from economic bondage to rural oligarchs. Likewise, opportunities opened up for the upper caste rural elites in terms of acquiring higher education in urban areas, taking new jobs and escaping penury, especially in densely populated cash crop regions where their much subdivided holdings had become uneconomic. Karanth argues that caste based hereditary occupations and social mobility in the rural areas also led to dual culture, by which he means patterns of behavior that is adherence to traditional values in one context and modern and egalitarian ones in another. Dual culture may also be seen as reflecting a transitional stage in a dynamic process in rural society, wherein notions of purity and pollution are generally being eroded. This once again reinforces the element of human agency which is discussed earlier. Despite these welcome changes since the 1950s, nonetheless, sociologists still cast a note of skepticism as to whether caste has really changed or disappeared in modern India. According to Gupta, caste has not changed intrinsically, but rather modernization has brought to light aspects of caste that were previously darkened by imperfect lenses. Caste identities are still very strong, even though castes are no longer locally confined. Concomitantly, caste mobility is now much more of a routine affair than it ever was in the past. Over half of the Indian population still lives in rural areas, and according to official statistics, half this population consists of agricultural laborers from ex-untouchables or scheduled castes. They are largely poor laborers and smallholders despite the emergence of a prosperous and educated creamy layer element within lower caste populations. These groups still reportedly have far lower average levels of income and literacy than Indians of clean caste origins. However, sociologists and other social scientists at least agree on one point, that caste is dynamic, flexible, and changing over time, with plenty of scope for rejection and innovation of tradition, and at times of disaster, it can assume specific forms. Let us see now the gender, caste, and class among tribes. Caste society is essentially a Hindu society. M. N. Srinivas has conceptualized the tribal process of transformation by what he calls Sanskritization. In fact, since the period of British Raj, when the isolated tribal groups got exposed to the Hindu civilization, it has been analyzed with vantage point that the tribal groups are marginal to Hindu society and their future lies only in their incorporation with the caste Hindus. N. K. Bose, while arguing for the tribal population in Hindu society advances the plea that in the caste system, the productive activities of various castes are protected against competition from other castes. This attracts tribal groups to come within the caste fold even if they are accorded a lower status. Yet another reason for the easy absorption of tribal society into caste society is the superior technological base which the latter provides. Ghorye prefers to describe tribal groups as backward Hindus and sees their future only in accepting room in the caste system. For him, Hindu society and caste system are synonymous. Srinivas follows the same caste model for the tribals. He, on the basis of social evidence found among the Kurgs, observed a tendency among the communities lower down the run to emulate the lifestyle of the dominant castes of the region, who in turn would try to conform to all India scriptural norms. By this process of emulation, the castes lower down the rung would move up in the caste ladder. Given below are some examples of tribes who have undergone these changes. Let us see the Bhil tribe. Traditionally, the Bhils were agriculturists, and in course of time, they have adopted a large number of occupations. Now, the Bhils have turned as entrepreneurs and executives in corporations from traditional agriculturists. They are also engaged in government, public and private sectors as mine owners, employee in zinc mines and textile mills, teachers, police officers, etc. This occupational mobility has broken the traditional interdependence on agriculture for their livelihood. Besides this, it has also added a new source of income to the Bhil's economy. Among the Bhil tribe, in the hilly and forest area land, particularly fertile and irrigated, was considered to be a source and mark of economic power. Bhils are newcomers to agriculture, and those among them who owned some patches of land were ranked high in society. Ownership of cattle also elevated them to a higher status. Yet another status base for the Bhils living in the forest and hills has been the ownership of the forest trees. These include mango and mahua. If the person owns about a dozen of mahua trees, his needs of liquor for the whole year are assured. Besides liquor, mahua trees also yield of food items during scarcity days. Mango trees give cash money to the owner. Fruit trees, therefore, are considered to be substantial source of income to the Bhils. The Bhils of the plains came in contact with the caste Hindus and the Christian missionaries. The caste Hindus influenced the Bhils in the realms of economy and ethnicity. Let us now see the Rabhas tribe. Due to the advent of formal education, a gradual change took place in the occupational sector. With the help of modern education as well as knowledge, they are now able to compete with contemporary society. Thus, they have the capability to seek for government jobs and other official works and as a result, the new generation is coming to more close contact with the so-called advanced society. Now each and every member is applying their knowledge for betterment of occupational pursuits. Modern occupation is providing them better access of livelihood, and at the same time their lifestyle is changing. The people engaged in services belong to government services and school teaching. Though it is true that a good percentage of population depends on agriculture, but they were not at all dependent on traditional agricultural means. Now they totally used the modern agricultural implements and applied developed technological devices like power tiller, shallow pump, use of fertilizers and pesticides on the field and so on. In recent times, one can see an emergence of a small privileged section among tribes. A small privileged section has been emerging as a result of the advantages of special privileges, education, land owning, or other factors, while on the other extreme is the lowest, toiling, exploited classes of contemporary Indian society. This class of vocal, privileged minority would inevitably utilize the benefits bestowed on the tribals in the form of special concessions in their game of the entire tribal people, but which in reality would serve only their interests. In contrast to the isolated homogeneous tribe, the caste is heterogeneous, hierarchically stratified, with more interactions and occupational specializations. However, it would be wrong to conceive a tribe as completely isolated. A tribe is relatively isolated in comparison to the Hindus. It is said that in India there is a process of gradual conversion of the tribal people into caste. It is believed that with the lessening of isolation and increasing interaction with the Hindus, the tribals come closer to the caste pole. It is believed that as the tribals come in close contact with the caste Hindus, often there is continuous process of imbibing and borrowing from the neighboring Hindu culture, and accordingly the tribals gradually come under the caste fold and get accommodated in the bottom strata according to the nature of the adaptation of the Hindu values and behavior pattern. Let us now see the Mundas of Midnapur district in West Bengal. There are different elements of continuity between the tribal Munda and the Hindu socio-cultural systems. First comes the economic interaction between the local Hindu population and the Mundas. Since there is no artisan group among the Mundas, they totally depend on different Hindu artisan castes. The Mundas also get services like midwifery, hair cutting, and washing from the Hindu castes. In the ceremonies associated with the rites of passage, the Mundas, like the local Hindus, utilize the services of the Brahman, that is a priest, Dhobi, that is a washerman, and so on. The Mundas normally do not take any service from the local caste Hindus for performing rituals except in the case of birth, marriage, and death. Mundas regularly attend some popular Hindu festivals. On the basis of the above discussion, it is obvious that these Mundas can be regarded as a residue of a tribal culture where there is a continuous process of imbibing and borrowing from the neighboring Hindu caste culture. One can also observe these changes as part of a conscious effort of the Mundas to follow the Hindu beliefs and practices and behavior patterns as a process to identify themselves with the neighboring dominant Hindu culture. One can also observe these changes as part of a conscious effort of the Mundas to follow the Hindu beliefs and practices and behavior patterns as a process to identify themselves with the neighboring dominant Hindu culture. To maximize the difference between Hindus and tribals, it is routinely said that the tribals, unlike the Hindus, have equality and no caste system. This fits in with the trend that aboriginals all over the world are redefining their own cultural heritage in terms of the noble savage, the idealized views which romantic Westerners had projected into them. Thus, the Gaia Atlas of First Peoples quotes one Pat Dodson Aborigine as saying, In traditional Aboriginal society, no one person was more important than another. All were parts of a whole. Growth and stature were measured by contribution, participation, and accountability. Some tribes, especially the most primitive ones, with little functional differentiation, may have come closer to this egalitarian idea than others, but in general, we can question this assertion on several counts. Equality is a very modern concept, and we may doubt that there exists a norm of equality even within a tribe, within a clan, within a family. Moreover, even without hierarchical ranking, there can be a division in endogamous groups, that is, castes, or in Indian terms, endogamous jatis, though without varna ranks. The world over, tribal populations observe various kinds of caste distinctions. Thus, concerning tribals on the Pacific Islands in the Mariami group, it was a common belief that only the nobles were endowed with an immortal soul, and a nobleman who married a girl of the people was punished with death. In Polynesia, the commoners were looked upon by the nobility as a different species of beings. Hence, in the higher ranks, marriage was concluded only with persons of corresponding positions, and if in Tahiti a woman of rank chose an inferior person as a husband, the children he had by her were killed. Among the natives of Fiji, too, a strict hierarchy, a kind of caste system, regulates all of village life. So these Polynesian tribals had endogamous groups in a hierarchical relation, that is, nobility and commoners. The relation between them was neither more egalitarian nor more flexible than that between Hindu castes. On the contrary, marriage outside the caste was not punished with mere expulsion, as happens among Brahmins, but with death. Endogamy was once a worldwide practice, and there is no reason to assume that Indian tribes are an exception. Yet, people ignore the caste nature of certain social structures even when describing them, because the idea that the tribals are caste free egalitarians has become so entrenched. According to Dick Koyman, who witnessed the following authentic juxtaposition among Indian tribals, marriages take place strictly within the tribe, and any form of caste system is unknown. What this says is effectively the tribe is strictly endogamous and endogamous groups are unknown. Yes, the tribe knows no subdivisions in endogamous groups, but that is because the tribe itself is the endogamous unit. Hindutva authors have done little to correct this view by showing that a kind of caste consciousness is equally pervasive in tribal and in Hindu society, probably because of their eagerness to de emphasize caste as a defining aspect of Hinduism. All the same, the job has been done and well done by anthropologists and Christian missionaries. We quote a brief sample. Christoph von Führer-Hammendorf writes about the Khova tribe in the Northeast. Their social organization is based on a system of exogamous clans distributed over all the 10 villages. The tribe is strictly endogamous and there is no intermarriage with any neighboring tribe. Likewise, in central India, the Gonds of Bastar have rules of endogamy and even observe untouchability. The Munda tribals not only practice tribal endogamy and commensality, but also observe a jati division within the tribe, buttressed by notions of social pollution, a mythological explanation, and harsh punishments. A Munda Catholic theologian testifies, the tribals of Chotanagpur are an endogamous tribe. They usually do not marry outside the tribal community because to them the tribe is sacred. The way to salvation is the tribe. Among the Santals, it is tabooed to marry outside the tribe or inside one's clan, just as Hindus marry inside their caste and outside their gotra. More precisely, to protect their tribal solidarity, the Santals have very stringent marriage laws. A Santal cannot marry a non-Santal or a member of his own clan. The former is considered as a threat to the tribe's integrity, while the latter is considered incestuous. Among the Ho of Chotanagpur, the trespasses which occasion the exclusion from the tribe without chance of appeal are essentially those concerning endogamy and exogamy. Christian missionaries have had to accommodate the attachment of tribals to their caste rules. From the discussion above, we can very well understand that tribes are not egalitarian in nature, but there is the existence of class and caste system among them. We find that the notion that the tribals have no caste distinctions is mistaken. Hindu caste society is not antagonistic to tribal society. On the contrary, it is nothing but tribal society at a more advanced and integrated stage, where tribes are no longer self-contained societies but building blocks of a much larger and more complex society. Thank you.